It is now time for Fersan in the Field, Real Issues, Real Solutions, brought to you by Newport-Fersan, Jamaica. And joining us this morning is Melvin Henry, Technical Manager, Newport-Fersan. Good morning, Melvin, and welcome to the Big 94. How are you?
Good morning, Altia. I'm doing great. Good morning to our listeners. I'm doing great. The weather is fine.
Good.
So our farmers are fine as well.
Now, Melvin, I know people want me to ask you about whether or not they're going to have enough fertilizer. So let me start with that question. Given what is happening out there in the Middle East with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, people want to make sure that they have enough fertilizers to grow their plants.
Fair question. In reality, based on how we operate at Newport-Fersan, at this point, it is fair to say that there is no immediate concern as it relates to the availability of fertilizer. We operate in a manner that we ensure. So at this point, there is no compromise to our ability to deliver. How things will progress, that's yet to be seen. But we're hoping for the best.
And I'm certain that you'll keep us abreast of any changes that take place.
Most definitely.
All right. So this morning we are trying to unpack the relationship, or how the relationship between two of the known powerhouses of crop nutrition can actually be detrimental to the farmer's drive to have the best possible yields. And for starters, I want to find out what would you say makes nitrogen and potassium two essential nutrients for overall plant health and performance. Why are they important? And why is there this tug-of-war between them?
Okay, so the reality is that, and just for a bit of context, on average, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen makes up approximately 90 to 96% of the plant's dry matter. So combined, we're talking about carbon occupying 90 to 96% of the dry matter. These elements are primary, and you just mentioned a while ago what is happening in the Middle East. Luckily, these elements are primarily derived from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and water. Mm-hmm. So it means that there's no need for you to make a trip to a farm store to access these. And these three nutrients actually form the structural backbone of plant tissues. So the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fat that makes up the plant are heavily dependent on carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now, refocusing on nitrogen and potassium, which makes up a smaller yet critical percentage of the plant when compared to those I mentioned just now, it is important to note that even at these relatively small concentration of nitrogen being about 1 to 3% and potassium 1 to 4% in terms of the volume it occupies within the plant, it is important to note that despite being at these low percentages, both are essential because they play key roles in the growth and overall performance of the plant. So for starters, nitrogen drives vegetative growth. And when we speak of vegetative growth, we're talking about all of the development that takes place in the plant, be it above ground or below ground. Oftentimes it is easy to associate vegetative growth with just the shoot, that part of the plant above the ground. But that is also taking place. So all of that growth that takes place before the plant trips into what we call productive mode, where it starts to flower and fruit, is regarded as vegetative mode. And primarily, in the early set, that's what nitrogen drives, the production of proteins and photosynthesis, which is production of chlorophyll, that green pigment in the leaf, and by that the plant is able to make food. So the vegetative growth, as I said before, is that phase of development where the plant really focuses on leaf development, stem development, root development, rather than flowers and fruit. Okay. So it involves rapid growth of cells and the canopy of the plant. It talks about the building and the support of the energy system. So it's pretty much laying the foundation for what's to come later, the flowering and the fruiting stages. On the other hand, potassium is known for its role in the regulation of the movement of water and other enzyme activities within the plant. So, helping the plant to maintain its strength, improve the resistance of the plant and the resilience of the plant to tolerate stress, such as drought. Those are key functions or roles of potassium. Now, in reality, balanced growth, where you need what we need is balanced growth. But because these two nutrients have separate functions, if it is that the nutrition program or what they're exposed to presents an imbalance, then we're going to have a challenge in terms of how well the plant is able to grow and at the same time produce well. And that is why we call it a tug-of-war, because the excess of one can impede the performance of the other.
All right.
Which
explains why we're having this conversation, because clearly
Definitely.
both are important. And you mentioned a tug-of-war, so there seems to be some kind of imbalance that is taking place between the two, even though both are important.
Definitely.
So talk to us a little bit about that, and you have just a minute and a half to do that before we have to break away for the news. The relationship between the two of them and why there is this tug-of-war.
Okay, so the relationship between potassium and nitrogen can be one of three. You could have a situation where nitrogen is winning, meaning that there is excess nitrogen in relation to potassium. That's one extreme, and it's not the best. The other extreme is where you have excess potassium and nitrogen. So potassium is winning and nitrogen is losing. So in comparison, you have higher levels of potassium compared to nitrogen. So that situation is also a bad situation. The third is what we want to achieve at all times, a balance between the two, where both nutrients are able to do what their purpose are in the life of the plant, to facilitate growth, at the same time to ensure that the structural integrity of the plant and its ability to resist the stresses that it will encounter in life are up to par.
I'm listening to you, Melvin, and this is part of the reason it's important for us to have these conversations is that perhaps sometimes as consumers we take for granted what it is that the farmer has to be aware of and the kind of work that goes into his operations. Because who knew that you had to have this kind of understanding of what happens between nitrogen and potassium? It is actually crazy to think that we're eating food all the time, but we're not stopping to think about this. Can you just quickly, before we have to break away, cite a few common examples, maybe one or two before we take the break, of where excess nitrogen, for example, impacts yield?
Okay, one of the most common is one that happens in sweet potatoes. So the farmer will have a field that is looking lush, green, and all seems fine. But on the day of harvest, there's a different story. Normally what tends to happen in situations like those is that you have an excess supply of nitrogen. And as mentioned before, nitrogen keeps the plant in a vegetative mode for longer, delaying the onset of production. So instead of you harvesting root tubers that are ready to be consumed, you'll find root tubers that are very long because nitrogen is saying to those root tubers, continue to grow at the expense of stopping the growth in length and for it to be developed across. So you have a tuber that is harvestable and marketable. So that's one common example that we're seeing. When we come back from the break, I'll touch a few others as it relates to watermelon, carrots, peppers, as well as onions.
All right, thank you very much, Melvin. So we're breaking away now for the news and the weather with Paula Ann, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Melvin Henry, Technical Manager, Newport-Fersan. Fersan in the field, real issues, real solutions. Time now for more Farm Talk in Sunny Side Up, and our guest at this time is Melvin Henry, Technical Manager, Newport-Fersan. We're inside the feature, Fersan in the Field, Real Issues, Real Solutions. And this morning we're addressing the silent tug-of-war between nitrogen and potassium and how that imbalance can reduce crop yield. And before we went off for the news, Melvin was citing a few examples where excess nitrogen impacts yield. Melvin?
Yes, Al, you're picking up the pieces. So, in reality, one may ask, what are some of the most profound ways in which excess nitrogen has been impacting yields? And I want to break this down into four major groups. The first of which is you have a delay in the reproductive growth of the plant. So what it means is that the plant remains in what we call the vegetative growth phase for a longer period. Essentially delaying production or the reproductive phase. This is seen by fewer flowers emerging, and even if they do emerge, you have fewer translations or moving from actual flower to fruit development. If flowering and fruit sets were initiated before and there's an excess application of nitrogen, what could happen is that you'll have both flower and the fruit fall occurring. So that's a possibility where you have excess nitrogen. So once the relationship between potassium and nitrogen is of such, structurally the plant will not be able to retain those flower or fruits, and ultimately you'll have those fall. The second of which is the reduction in the size of the harvestable plant parts. And we have several plant parts that we harvest. We have fruit, bulbs, we have stem tubers as in Irish potato, root tubers, sweet potato. We have flowers in the case of broccoli and cauliflower. And we also have seeds. So when you're talking about peanut and your beans, those are the harvestable parts. So you actually can have a situation where because of the excess nitrogen, you have a reduction in the size of these. All of this is really because the excess nitrogen suppresses the uptake of potassium, and once you have a low potassium crisis, fruit filling will be poor. All right, so that's the net result of you having that imbalance. Thirdly, the excess nitrogen causes soft water reproduce. So there is generally a higher water content in relation to dry matter. And as a result of that, you tend to have plants that are more mushier. And as a result, you tend to have poor shelf life of your produce. So they tend to disintegrate, break down at a faster rate once the balance between nitrogen and potassium is off. In field, you could also have, the final point is increase in disease pressure. When you have excess nitrogen at play in the tissues of your plant, it simply means that the tissues of the plants are softer, they're more attractive to pests and diseases, so you're going to have overall pest pressure, which includes both pathogenic diseases and your insect pressure. So those are attractions. High nitrogen concentration is really an attraction for those. And counter to that, in addition to that rather, it suppresses the uptake of potassium. And once the potassium uptake is suppressed, remember we mentioned earlier that the key role of potassium is actually to help with the plant's resilience to deal with the challenges that it will face. So achieving the balance is what we need to do to ensure that all of these 4 points are eliminated or reduced to the mere minimum so that we can have better yields at the end of a particular crop cycle.
And I know that your group, you really have been focusing on the ways to guide the process of helping the farmers to reduce and ultimately eliminate the scenarios that you have painted here this morning. Tell us, what are some of the ways that you have been doing this?
Okay, so Newport-Fersan has long been the proponent of soil testing because soil testing plays a critical role in us determining what must be added. Traditional practice is one where farmers use, as the name suggests, something that has been around for quite some time, something that another farmer is doing. But the reality is that farmers doing the same thing at different locations are having different results. And it speaks to the fact that there is something more subtle happening within our soils. And as a result, we have always advocated for farmers to start from the ground up, where you have an appreciation of what exactly is happening in the soil. And once you're able to see what is happening within the soil, we're then able to craft or design a nutrient management program that best fits your desire in terms of yield. Case in point, last week, for example, we churned out in one zone about 24 nutrient management programs. And by my calculation, 70% of those programs out here did not need the inclusion of potassium. 70%.
Wow.
If those farmers did not do a soil test, they would have followed the traditional practices where they grab a bag of NPK fertilizer with the hope that they're doing the crop justice. But in reality, that would only be an expense with no guaranteed return on their investment, because you could very well be facilitating an imbalance between two nutrients that are crucial to ensure that the plant not only thrives and develop well, but also produce so that you can recover your investment and make a profit at the end. So that's one common example happening.
Yes, and that is why, Melvin, I figure you all place such a great emphasis on soil testing.
Absolutely. I remember visiting a farmer recently doing a crop, and when I checked with him, they were having challenges within the field. He was having some challenge. And when I started to investigate what exactly he had done up to that point of my visit, which was around about 6 weeks into the crop, and that crop is a crop that lasts for 12 weeks, so we're midway. When I checked with what the farmer did to date, the farmer had applied 145 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Now, the crop requires, that crop in particular, requires on average 150 pounds of nitrogen for the entire crop cycle for an yield of 40,000 pounds. Now, at midway, if it is that you have applied almost all of your nitrogen during the vegetative stage, what it simply means is that, one, you would have effectively lengthened the vegetative growth stage, one, and you did not factor in any at all, going back to the importance of soil test, whether or not the organic matter content in the soil was 1, 2, 3, or 4. So, for example, if his soil sample organic matter content was 4%, what it means essentially is that already from the soil, you would have been deriving 40 pounds of nitrogen. If you take away 40 pounds of nitrogen from 150, you would have only needed to apply 110 pounds of nitrogen versus 145 already applied, plus the 40 that is there, 185.
My goodness.
So essentially what this farmer did was to oversupply nitrogen to this crop, delay the crop moving into the productive mode, increase his disease pressure, because that was why I was called. They were having significant challenges combating fungal and bacterial. This is what actually happens once you have excess nitrogen within the tissues of the plant. But apart from the soil testing that we do out here and the design of programs, we also believe that it is very important for us to be able to make decisions within the field in in real time. And as such, the company has invested in the use of technologies like we have been before, soil compaction meter, microscopes in the field. We're able to determine pH in the field. And now we're able to determine the nitrogen concentration within a leaf within a matter of 5 seconds or less.
Wow.
So it therefore
Impressive.
gives us the opportunity on the spot to say to this farmer, listen, you need to increase your potassium application, or you need to reduce, or for nitrogen, reduce your potassium application. So we're able, as a company, as a technical unit, to within real time, using this meter, to respond to the farmers' challenges and ensure that we can make decisions within a matter of minutes.
And that is very important, and I'm very happy that you have brought this kind of information to our farmers this morning. Quickly, Melvin, before you leave us, what are some of the key points you would want our listeners to remember from this morning's conversation?
Okay, so from this morning, I want us to remember that nitrogen drives growth, potassium drives yield and quality, and too much of one reduces the effectiveness of the other. And hence, the balance is critical for maximum production. And as mentioned before, Newport-Fersan, we're able to, within real time, assess what's happening in the field and provide you with a guide to respond to the challenges that might be lurking or silently happening within the system of the plant.
And all the farmer has to do is ask, and very critical, we're not just talking about large farmers or commercial farms, we're talking about all farmers who require this kind of assistance can actually access it.
Definitely. When we say farmers, we're talking from the immeasurable land size to the thousands of acres. We include everybody.
Okay. All right. So a little bit of land to a massive amount of land.
Plantations, of course.
All right. All right. Thank you so very much, Melvin. Always a pleasure. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Okay, Althea, it was a pleasure as well.
All right. Take care. Melvin Henry, Technical Manager, Newport-Fersan, Jamaica. That was Fersan in the Field. Real issues, real solutions. Addressing this morning the silent tug-of-war between nitrogen and potassium and how that imbalance reduces crop yield. Great information provided, and I hope you sit up and pay attention to all of that.